I am Eric Manning, and I'm with my friend Stuart Elliott, and we've started a podcast named Through the Abyss, where we discuss and confront issues which often start in childhood and how they manifest in our adult lives. The images you will see are related to the topics of our discussions. They have been painted over the last 20 plus years and can be seen on the website ericmanning.info.
Today we're talking about one of Eric's paintings that he did a few years ago. It's called 2021 AD, and it's a picture with a lot of different elements in it. Eric's really good at bringing things together as things occur to him as he's working on his paintings. He adds to it, and kind of a story is told as he goes about it. In the center of the painting is the central part of it, I think, is a coffin, and there are butterflies coming out of it. So you wonder, in the macabre sense, who or what is in the coffin? Why is it there? And you can see different elements around it. There's, of course, some water coming down, and I noticed it's kind of floating in air too. So that's interesting as well. He also has some flora, a couple of trees there, and he can talk about that. In the lower left is a cemetery, and he can talk about what that means. Anything there so far you'd like to expound on?
So I might as well start with the center of the painting, which is the coffin shack. So that's I just looked up coffin shacks, what they look like when people were, buried and, didn't have a lot of money, or, maybe they just didn't have any family at all. Maybe they were just, only children and they died alone, it's just so the whole concept of the coffin shack is, and why I started sketching that. That was the first thing that I sketched. I started sketching. And the whole idea behind that is having somebody's life not be very important, to illustrate somebody's life not being very important, or just being poor, or being, unappreciated, or undervalued, or second, always second, or always last, last in line kind of thing.
It's interesting. I've never heard the term before this, coffin shack. I've certainly heard of a coffin and I've heard of a shack, but I've never heard them put together like this. So is that a real thing, a coffin shack, quote unquote, or did you just put two words together that worked well?
Well, I think off the bat, I just started looking at a lot of different varieties of coffins, and I think somebody had one on their back or their arm or something, like a tattoo artist had created. I like to look at a lot of tattoo artists' work because some of them are just incredible. Some of the most incredible artists out there today are definitely tattoo artists. So I saw, somebody's, denoted a coffin shack or something like. I was like, oh, that's friggin' perfect, because I was looking for a coffin that was not anything but, $5,000 or more, nothing expensive, or just something really kind of poor, or just. And I've just remembered seeing, especially in the South, you'd see a lot of coffins that were just built out of regular wood, just sometimes just out of really cheap, wood, out of 2x4s or whatever they used. And some of it wasn't even that expensive, it was even cheaper wood than that, or just scrap wood, just build them a box to get them in the ground, because they weren't valued, or they weren't cared for, or they weren't, they just didn't have much money, or whatever the case may be. I just wanted it to look like a desperate coming out of a very lonely and desperate place.
Is there a connotation of that from your own life for you? I know I've heard you talk about your father and some of the things that he would do or say, and did he factor into this at all with what you did there?
Yeah, most definitely. So it denotes my childhood, coming from my childhood, for sure. I realized throughout my life, that me and my father had, he just didn't care, about me. I couldn't talk to him. I think the worst part it was just a horrible relationship all the way up to I saw him a couple years before he passed, and I knew he was probably going to. And I really tried to communicate with him one last time before he passed, but it just wasn't happening. And he just was too proud of where he was or what he thought that he had accomplished in life. And he wasn't going to, talk to me about anything, about our relationship or his relationship with anybody. So, it wasn't just, just not just my father, it was my mother too. Very difficult marriage. They're very difficult people to deal with, not supportive. I knew I was in trouble. I was in a lot of trouble. Literally, I'd get into trouble, especially in grade school, junior high, and some in high school too, especially when I wasn't playing sports. Sports used to kind of keep me busy or, active or something for a while, long enough so I wouldn't get in trouble. But I just had a lot of trouble, and they were not supportive of anything that I was or anything that I did. And I just remembered one time my father would say, "Oh man, I think somebody was actually, it was really sad. It's like my uncle was dying of AIDS, and he came over to the house, and I said, man, I didn't realize I took a drink off of his drink. And I didn't really, way back then, we didn't really know much about the virus. I didn't think you could get it, but I said, oh, maybe, I kind of said to my father, maybe I shouldn't have taken a drink off of, Uncle's soda there because, it's just, and he's like, well, if you die, we'll just bury you in a wooden box. We'll get you a wooden box to bury you in. And even though he was joking, just with a smirk on his face, it was always passive aggressive in that way, that he was joking, but he wasn't. He really wasn't joking. He valued my life very little because I just wasn't like him, and I think it was more than that. I think it was just I think he just had a horrible abusive or he had a lot of abuse happen to him as well. He was inflicted with a lot of abuse from his childhood too, even though he doesn't call it abuse. He calls it necessarily discipline or whatever. He just said, no, I liked it when, I got hit. I liked it when I got whipped real good, by my mother, because it taught me how to work. And I'm just like, okay, it motivated you to work, pain motivated you to work. And yeah, he's like, yep, just stop feeling sorry for myself and just get up off my ass and get going. Stop feeling sorry for and it just, there's more to it than that. So anyway, back to the very lonely, I couldn't talk to him about, like I said, I couldn't talk to him about anything. It was a very lonely and isolated and like death, it was like, to me, it was like being in a coffin, and not a nice one, not a nice padded one, a really lonely, isolated and dark place. And I think that's where all that comes from. That's how I started the piece, that's where this came from, where I came from. Because the best thing you can do, I think, as an artist is be honest about where you're coming from and why.
There's another interesting element right there with the around the coffin are butterflies. Normally, butterflies are looked at as a nice, a hopeful kind of image. Is that what these are in your painting? These butterflies that are coming up from the coffin?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting story. So that kind of just happened after I heard a song from this band called Architects, Dead Butterflies. What a song that is. Wow. I'm not a really big metal fan, but sometimes, man, those, the harder rock songs, I like them. They're really, especially something meaningful like that. The lyrics are just amazing. I just couldn't believe how good that song and how it just grabbed me. Like, oh yeah, really get where this guy's. He just really related to me in a profound way. And so I started painting butterflies around inside of the coffin. And I just said, well, why don't I just make the butterflies coming out of the coffin, look like dead butterflies coming out of the coffin. And that's why I started doing it. And it just, and then I painted like, got a dozen of them, probably coming up and out of the coffin. If you look closely, you can kind of see the smaller ones inside the darkness. I highlighted them with yellow, like a bright yellow hue. So you could actually see them inside, but it's like they're coming alive. They're not really dead, they're dead butterflies coming to life. So there you go. There's the irony or the metaphor.
And of course, we have the coffin itself, as we said, floating in the air. It looks like pieces of the ground, the dirt falling down below it, and all the way down as you have a sea of fire at the very bottom of the painting. I don't know if that's the coffin is descending into the sea of fire or coming up out of it or just hovering over it. I don't know.
Okay, so I'm not just painting floating objects here just to get an effect. This is very meaningful. There's a lot of meaning behind that. Well, the meaning behind that is if you look to the left, the bottom left, you'll see it's supposed to be broken off from the graveyard part, or with that tree, that dark, it's called the tree of fear, in the graveyard, and the tombstone and the spiral, hypnotic spiral effect, so that's floating off of it. It's broken off from the world, the world that I come from, the dark and eerie and horrible place that I come from there. And it's just so in the elevations, because it's floating, it's symbolic for faith. It's like you're in a different faith is something greater than, supposed to be something greater than you and outside of you, and something that lifts you up and out of, really that's what faith is about. I think it's supposed to redeem you or bring you up and out of the place that you're in, redeem the past and elevate you closer to God in the future, or whatever you believe in the future. And that's what that is.
So you're kind of hovering between heaven and hell there. You did mention on the left the graveyard and the tree of fear. Can you talk more about that? Describe the elements of it, what is in the graveyard, and what the meaning of those pieces might be.
Yeah, so the one of my favorite parts there in the graveyard is definitely that tree, and I call it the tree of fear. And if you look closer at the tree, you'll see a lot of different faces of fear and anguish and pain and sorrow going all the way up the tree, all the way down to the bottom where the graves are, or the tombstones are, and all the way up to the top of it where it kind of bends and bends off left into the away from the canvas. And on the right hand side, you'll see a branch of the tree of fear holding my heart. You'll actually, one of the arms or the hands of the branch is actually squeezing the heart and holding on to it and not letting go. And I just remember that's what it was like for me. It was just like, I just want to be let go of this fear. I just want to be free. I always tried to get free or get away from my family, and my parents, it just always, and I did a lot. The best times of my life were just staying away from them. And that's where I learned more how to be me than any other time in my life, and it was just, the hard thing is that, eventually you got to go back home. If you're staying there, you kind of have to go back home. And it was a very non-relational, dark and violent and lonely place. You just wondered, and I always wondered why that was. I think that's what that whole, and underneath the tree, kind of hidden underneath the tree, you'll see demons and skulls and goblins and fire. It's a hell. It's like a pit of hell, because I just saw it getting worse and worse and worse. It's just like, man, this whole, me and this family, it seems like we're going to hell in a handbasket. I mean, I could be wrong here, but it's just not getting any better. And I just saw a never-ending cycle of dysfunction or dismay or hopelessness or anger and hatred and envy and all the horrible things that go along with relationships, and just the talk, just the way my father would talk about my mother, and it's just like, it was horrifying just to hear his disrespect or disregard and for his own wife and his own, and I knew that's the way he felt about me as well, and I heard, it always comes back to you. I know he's talking behind my back to my mother, because she would tell me, all the time, and it would always get back, and it went round and round, and just that's what that whole thing was about. There's also a tombstone that on the very bottom, so the tree, the arms of the tree, or the trunk of the tree goes way, it goes right to the bottom of the painting, and then there's a tombstone that says "a rat bastard," and just like, it's just like, who's, and I always wondered, I'm like, what's the evil behind this? Who's the rat bastard? And, especially in, I wasn't from the city, but I was from the Hudson Valley, which was about 70 miles north of the city. And I'd hear that term, "Oh, you rat bastard," and it's just, that was a thing that we said a lot growing up. And when I grew up, and it's just, I was like, well, who's the rat bastard behind my family? Is it my father? Is it my mother? Is it both of them? Is it my grandparents? Or is it the devil? Or who is it?
Well, whoever it is, they have a headstone either above them or waiting for them, one of the two. I don't know if they're in the graveyard yet, but if not, the graveyard is ready and waiting for them. And then at the top of that graveyard, there's looks like there's a fence. There's like a big rock, or looks like a rock fence post, and then maybe a metal fence. That's really a cool image. I don't know if that means anything in particular, or it just really adds to that ambiance of the graveyard. I don't know.
The fence, the iron, it was supposed to be an iron fence that I would see a lot, especially, I mean, they're here in the Midwest as well, but there's a lot more of them in the East, in the Northeast, in upstate, like New York, especially the fancier ones, or the more religious ones, or the more protected ones. You'll see the fences like that, and they're very difficult. Yeah, and the gates, a lot of times they have them in Kansas City, and the gates are closed at night. It's just a feeling of being trapped. It's like one end, you got a cliff that goes over to the hellfire, and then the other, you got the gate that's holding you in. It's trapping you into death, or into, eternal sorrow, or death, or dismay, or it's just, but it's really all about bad relationships, bad family, relating, or relationships, or broken relationships.
You had mentioned earlier the swirl, the big alternating kind of green and yellow thing going around. The vortex is right above that fence. Does that represent anything in particular, which kind of permeates it? It spreads across the whole painting.
So there was always, I remember I was I always remember hearing that Goodbye Yellow Brick Road by, I think that's the name of the song, by Elton John. Great, wow, one of his best, I think, top 5. He's got a million great songs, but that one in particular is really good. And so I think that's what triggered that. And so, again, I think I've mentioned this before in some of the other podcasts, but I often paint to music. I listen. I have to listen to. It seems like it helps me focus, or just inspires me to paint, through the music. And I'm just constantly. I listen to hours and hours and hours. My headphones are worn out, man. They're really good ones too, but they just get worn out after a while. But it's great. It's really just an amazing motivator for me. And so that's that song, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, just so that would be like the opposite. So you think about Wizard of Oz and follow the yellow brick road. Well, this is kind of like the opposite of that, like this hypnotic, dark, ugly, never-ending, like hypnotic spell that one just kind of focuses on in the world, not think about their bad relationships or something bad that's happened in their life, or their horrible childhood growing up that they can't get over, or all the trauma or abuse. That's, to me, there was like a hypnotic effect that maybe it was drugs, or maybe it was something, sex, or just, I don't know, as a teenager, just being destructive, or being mischievous, or just something just kind of not so good, but hypnotic at the same time. To not there's always been that there for me. It's like, wow, that's a real powerful lure away from reality, that so I don't have to think about it. So that's what that whole spiral is about. Instead of it just being yellow, it's also like this eerie dark green with that is actually blended into black. I think that's why that worked as well as it did.
So it doesn't spiral out, it spirals in. You said it goes the opposite way. So is it bringing you in to the cemetery?
So yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it can go either way. I mean, if you look at it, it spirals out. But if you're looking if you're looking towards the graveyard, you go further and further. It's like hypnotic. That was the concept behind it. But if you look out, it's like, oh, well, this is really spanning out really big here. And then you see something else, hence the other side.
So I wanted to ask too, there's another piece of floating land or dirt above the coffin shack, where the butterflies, it looks like, are flying up too. And it looks like there's a body of water on that piece of land, and it looks like the water is falling down like a little waterfall onto that edge of the coffin. What is the symbology there?
Yeah, so that is flowing that water. So it's a pond with grass, and there's even a little dirt around the pond, I think. And one of the largest size butterflies is right in the middle of the pond. And actually, so the butterfly, if you look at that butterfly too, right in the middle of the pond, it's got red blood dripping down from it on its wings, towards the front of its wings to the back of its wings. And that represents redemption for me. And, also it's just like, it's like the blood of your childhood, or the bad stuff that happened just kind of rolls off. And I don't know. So I was just, you just think of different symbolic. I like to use symbolic imagery a lot, and metaphors, and that's part of that. So it could be the blood of my past, but it's like this redemptive nature to it as well. And so that pond goes all the way up into this portal there, and where this dove is, and it's coming out of this place, this heavenly place with the clouds, which you see, which are white and yellow and red. It's dripping, coming down. It forms this pond, and then it forms this grass that's growing. If you look at it, the grass is growing tall and it's healthy, and
Actually, what's really interesting about the pond, I think, is the lotus. There's a purple lotus that's growing right on the pond, and so a lotus grows up and out of mud from nowhere, almost out of nowhere, and so it's like, again, like you're growing up and out of the mud. You come from this dirty, mucky place, and yet you're coming up and out. It's kind of a miraculous flower. I think that's why a lot of it's used in a lot of spirituality, especially Eastern spirituality.
And then further to the right, also above the coffin shack, is another tree. It looks to be different than the tree of fear. It looks a lot healthier and a lot better. Can you tell us about that tree that's floating there above the coffin shack?
So the tree of fear on the bottom there that I talked about, it has no life to it. It's a dead tree with no leaves or branches. There's branches, but it just looks more like a dead tree, which doesn't bear any fruit or leaves or fruit or whatever. And that one does. And there's actually, if you look closely on it, I think I put like lemons on it, or there's fruit on it dangling from that tree. But there's so much color. There's so much yellows, and there's blended yellow green. You kind of have to look closer. There's also eyes on that tree looking up towards the face of, or just that whole heavenly scene up there. And then there's actually a mouth to the tree where water's flowing out of it. It's like he's just drinking from the fountain of life. It's just like, living water or whatever's coming out of it, flowing out, because there's life there. The faces on that tree are more in like awe of what's happening rather than desperation and death and fear and sorrow. So this is the opposite of that, or no, I don't, it's just, or totally, dichotomous of that. That's floating as well, because again, that's the connotating faith, or denoting faith in something greater than you that's not really in your control, and just kind of goes along with the whole butterfly effect and the whole, heavenly effect up top.
And I noticed right above that, it looks like a whole, of course, to the right of it, there's the blue sky, the clouds. That's always a great effect when you do that. And then above that, it looks like angelic beings up there, and a woman up there as well. Can you talk about that part of the painting?
Yeah, so on the right side, goes almost all the way to the bottom there, all the way to the fire on the bottom. You'll see the blue cloud effect there, which is like wiped. Interesting. I really like that. I like the wiping, I call it the wiping effect or technique. Yeah, you just use a brush. You just use a lot of odorless mineral spirits to cut the paint out. So you just start with a blue, different colored blues, or I think I used, I can't remember, maybe couple different colors of blues, and then you start wiping it and making cloud formations. And I really like that. It just gives it a very dimensional effect. And then you'll see like a guy, an angel with a sword with fire in his hair, symbolizing like passion, or a passion for fighting, or for this soul that's up and coming, or rising, coming up and out of the old or the hell and into heaven. And then there's seraphim angels, like baby, younger angels representing like youth and something new. And then there's a woman there with dark hair tending to the fruit of the tree. And they all have wings on them. If you get closer and you look, they all have wings on them, so they're like angelic beings. And she's attending to the fruit on the tree. There's also angel right next to Christ, who he has a cloud-like cloak all around him that goes into another cloud formation on the left of him, where the doves are coming up and out of. So that angel on his right to the right, and she's the biggest one there right next to him. I almost thought of like, wow, that kind of looks like his mother Mary, but I wasn't intending to do that. intending to do that at all, but it just kind of looks like that. It's like, oh wow, it's like his mother, it's like the mother. And then there's another angel below her, just more of a motherly type angel, just to kind of go along with the younger. Yeah, and you'll actually see right next to Mary, the angelic Mary, if you will, you'll see kind of like the crown of the clouds actually form like a crown of thorns around his head, but they're in like cloud-like shape, so this is this kind of surrealistic style. There's a little tear I noticed coming out of the side of Christ's eye, blood tear coming out for the soul of the person inside the coffin shack.
Now, for the person inside the coffin shack, we talked about earlier that probably represents you in there, the way you were brought up and talked about and how you were treated. So if you're in the coffin shack there, what state of mind or what state are you in while you're in the shack, in that coffin?
Well, I try to relate to, I don't just think it's definitely has to, for me to paint something like this, it has to be close to my heart to do that, for sure. But I do try to relate to a wider audience. I think there's a lot more people in a coffin shack, relationally speaking, than people would normally talk about or even realize sometimes. I think the biggest thing is the darkness inside the coffin shack, because it's like you're down or you're depressed, and you're unaware of anything really in that state when you're getting related to in that way, or your relationships are all downtrodden. You're downtrodden from your relationships, or you're not supported, or you're not connected. That's the biggest thing that I think I was trying to illustrate or demonstrate out of this, is just what it's like to have like zero love and any connection with another human being, and just longing for it, and maybe just seeing it out of a little tiny hole, like in that you see an eye popping through the hole of a coffin shack. I mean, just a little peek of it, it's like, oh, I'm in the darkness here. And just that revelation is huge, to me, just to have just a little peek at, oh, I am in the dark. But what if you never got out of that? You wouldn't know the difference. Just the way it is. This is who I am, and that's it. I'm done.
So returning then above that to the Christ figure, it looks like he has his hands out, and also it looks like there's maybe a dove putting something into his hands. Is that what that is?
So the dove with a baby in a net, carrying the baby in a net there, is just kind of a spin or takeoff on the stork delivering. When you're a little kid and you see storks delivering babies, oh, that's where babies come from, because they don't want to talk about, your parents, how it really happens, through intercourse. So this is a dove delivering the baby into. He's holding out his hands because the baby's being delivered into his hands. You'll see a hand also along with the eye. So the eye is seeing this. I just talked about the eye. So the eye is like having a vision of this. He's seeing like the future of what's going to happen. Maybe it's not, or maybe it's right in the present. Maybe he's experiencing the moment, but it's more like a vision that he's having, that he's seeing that's happening or going to happen in the future. And his hand, you see a little tiny hand popping out of the coffin shack out of the darkness, and then there's a board that breaks off and is floating up above the coffin shack. So he's actually he's breaking off the boards of the shack. He pushed up on it, and boom, the board broke, and now he's able to open it up, and then the butterflies come up and out of the dead butterflies come up and out of the coffin shack.
So he's having that vision of the future, near future or far. But so what does that mean to him? What is that when he looks through that knothole and sees this vision? Does that bring any kind of hope to him? Is that like looking at it like, oh, this will never happen? or it will happen, or what are you thinking inside the coffin?
So when the water as well is dripping onto, if you get real close, some of it's very detailed, but the water is meant to be dripping upon the shack, his hand, or just it's dripping on the shack, or maybe, who knows, maybe it gets a water droplet splashing on his eye. So it's real. So it's becoming real. It's a small reality at the time. It's just a beginning, but small reality. But it's a powerful reality because it's hope in the direction, in the spiritual direction that he's going in. I think that's really the most important message or concept I'm trying to describe here, or trying to denote or express here. It's just, it's that this is a process. This is not just a one-day thing. This is a long process that comes from childhood and goes all the way up through your whole life, and it's eternal. It's like an eternal thing, and that's the depth. If you look inside the clouds to the behind the dove, you'll see, it just goes, there's other doves delivering, coming with other babies. So there's other people doing this as well. There's other new life coming. It's not just you, and you're not alone in it.
Well, that is really good. So when you are in that darkness inside the coffin shack, and it overwhelms you, and I know there's many people that can relate to that, there is some hope. There is some things happening in the spiritual world that you may not even be aware of. So that's a good thing to be thinking about, that there is more to this life than what it appears to be. Is there anything else that we missed or didn't talk about on the painting that you'd like to bring up?
I think we covered the majority of the piece. I think there's always more. There's a lot of detail in this, and my creativity runs out when the canvas runs out, basically, and I try not to put too much on the canvas because, as you can see, the details are just unbelievable. They're endless, so I kind of have to pull back sometimes, say, okay, I need to give this some space, and because the ideas just keep on coming and coming and coming. But I think the biggest message behind this is just what I described before, but you can, out of a very desperate, lonely, hopeless, traumatic, maybe even abusive place you can come out of that and come into something better. There's hope for that. And that's what this is really all about.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's great. I love looking at that painting. You have so many great ones, and that's a good one to look at. So it's great to talk about it, and I learned a few things about it that I didn't know before. So it's really good. We'll wrap this up, and we'll look forward to doing another painting in the near future. So thanks a lot.
There's one more thing I'd like to add. There was a book after I did this piece. I started writing a synopsis or a description of what the piece was about for my website. And it was interesting because as I wrote, I just kept on going and going and going. And it turned out to be a 50-page story of what this piece is really all about, or in more detail, with a lot of different focus on particular images of different sections of the painting. So if you're interested, please go to my website at ericmanning.info. Follow the links. You could go straight to Amazon and buy it if you want. I believe they're the same price on Ingram Spark or Amazon. So whatever you want to do, if you're interested, please purchase it. You'll get a whole picture of my painting inside the book, along with many other, I think about 50 other images, almost 50 other images with it. So with the literature, you'll get this piece in a lot of different contexts along with the literature. Thank you very much for listening. See you next time.